I'm running for the District 3 seat for school board. I've lived in Collier County for 44 years. I worked for the school district for 30 years. I was in Immokalee for 28 years. I was at the middle school for 9 and at the high school for 19. I've been a teacher and a counselor and administrator in the school system, so I have a variety of experiences. I have a bachelor's degree in social science and a master's degree in counseling from Michigan State University and a doctorate in educational administration from Florida Atlantic University. I also had the opportunity to work for a charter school company. I was hired as a consultant for 2 years, and then for 3 months I was full-time principal of their Fort Myers site, so I also have some insight into charter schools. I've headed lots of committees, both before professionally and also in retirement. So I have a lot of experience working with committees and trying to get things done in terms of committees. Well, I'll end that for now.
Okay. The charter school company you spoke of, the name of it is?
Richard Milburn. They've been released from Lee County, I believe, which was part of why we parted company. I think the charter school movement needs to be looked at in terms of there are charter schools and then there are charter schools, and many of the companies that are in the business are in it to make a profit, and educating kids is a secondary objective. And that was my experience with that particular company.
What was the name of the school?
Richard Milburn Academy.
Okay. The company that oversaw it then, was it specific to that school? Or did it have,
It's a national company.
which
and
is called?
They call themselves Richard Milburn.
Okay, so every school they have is a Richard Milburn
Milburn
school here or there?
Yeah,
So they're
it's
all over.
called Richard Milburn
Okay.
Academy, no matter where they're located, and then like the Manatee site, the Fort Myers site,
Okay.
and so forth.
Have they had that same problem at other sites as far as you know?
I haven't heard. The one they had up in Bradenton was perhaps a little more successful. Nationally, I don't know. I left that company 10 years ago, and the only thing I've been able to
Okay.
follow is what they've done in Lee County, which has not been very successful.
From the experience you had with that, when an application were to come to you as a school board member, how would you look at that application for a charter school differently than the school board is looking at it now?
I would probably make sure, there are things I would look for to make sure that they, the one thing that's big, that people don't look at enough, and I think was the problem with the one that started up in Immokalee that was closed within a month or so, you really have to look at the financial basis for how solid is the group, how are they going to function, where are they going to get the money from. Location also, particularly in Collier County, because one of the things I was hired to do was find a site in Collier County. And the one thing I found which is the zoning restrictions in Collier County make it extraordinarily difficult to find an appropriate site, which is both good and bad. It's not necessarily a criticism of zoning, but it does restrict where you're going to put charter schools. And you want to make sure that the company or group, whoever's starting one, is aware of all these things and having the appropriate site where they can handle the traffic and how many kids do they plan on serving and all of that. You really need to take a hard look at that before and make sure that group has taken a hard look at that before they get started. Otherwise, they're gonna spend several years just spinning their wheels trying to find, nothing else finding a site that's appropriate.
And I'm guessing something you would want to look at is the company's track record to see if it's, as you said, one of these companies is primarily concerned with making a profit or whether its primary goal is educating kids. And how do you differentiate that
Right. Well,
without a big track record of a bunch of schools elsewhere?
Right, and I think like the motivation of the Marco Island Charter was very different, where you had parents in a location, and back when they first started, they wanted a middle school on Marco Island, so their motivation was quite different. But even there, luckily, they've weathered the storm of the financing part of it. But those are all things you have to look at in particular though, the financing and facilities and the track record, if they're coming with a track record of any kind, or is this a bunch of newbies starting up from nothing? In which case you probably need to look at them even more so or help them in some way, although I'm not sure the school board district has any obligation to help them.
But do you have a negative association with charter schools?
Well, what I saw from the company I worked for, their interest was in making money, not educating kids. So it didn't leave me with a good impression about the ones that are profit-making. And that's another thing. They come in as nonprofit, but almost all of them have a profit-making company who is making a profit. So the entity that you're granting the charter to may be nonprofit, but they are buying services from a profit-making organization. And that's a piece the public doesn't often realize. Also, Florida's rules are very different from other states, so people who see stuff on national television and this charter school in Connecticut or that charter school in Wyoming or wherever, and they come up, well, why can't we do that? Well, the rules in Florida are very different. For instance, you can't experiment the way you can in other states. The kids still have to take the FCAT. So the experimentation that they talk about with charter school, that to me is one of the bigger things. You want accountability, but by the same token, they sell charter schools on the idea of you're going to experiment, except you're not allowed to experiment. So, at least in Florida, and again, I stress that's Florida, the way Florida's set up.
You brought up the FCAT, but I guess that made me think of the Common Core curriculum. Do you have any viewpoints on it and its viability or its desirability?
Well, I keep having that question asked. First of all, the people who are anti-Common Core, the first question I would ask is, have you even read it? And what is it you are objecting to? Are you just objecting to the fact that they are national standards? The standards themselves, if somebody read them, I don't find them particularly offensive or anything wrong with national standards. Then the question becomes, do we look at local standards? Are we looking at, should there be just local standards? Should there be state? Should there be national? There probably was a time when I fought for the idea that I, as a classroom teacher, should be deciding what's taught in my classroom, and that's the only important thing. But quite frankly, I came to Florida so long ago, and what I came to after leaving Michigan was Collier County was in its third year of integration, and I found back then education in Florida was a disaster. And in 1977, Florida passed its first state standards. I was against it, but then I saw what it did, and what it did was force the school districts to start teaching kids. They weren't doing that before. They were basic minimal standards back then. I think we've gone The standards themselves, whether it's Florida standards or national standards, I worry a little that they've become too high. There are students who we have made it so difficult for them. Every child does not need to have physics to graduate from high school. Every child doesn't even really need algebra to graduate from high school. I think we've gone from not doing a good job of educating to the point where we've gotten standards which are kind of absurd when you're talking about all kids. Because there is a segment of the population which is not low enough to be in special education, but they're also not high enough to be even average. They need a broad basic education, and those kids are getting left out and left behind. And I worry about those as we keep making standards too high. By the same token, I don't want to see us not educating to the highest level. Obviously, we want every child to make the most of their educational experience. But I do think you can do both. I don't think it's impossible to do both.
Can you talk a little bit about your perception of how the superintendent is doing?
Well, one of the things was, obviously when she first came in, she was such a refreshing change from the previous superintendent. And everybody was excited and so forth. For the general public, I think the general public sees her as doing a pretty good job, and she is. I don't think there's a question there. But if there's one area that it seems to be a glowing, I don't even want to call it a flaw, but something that's she's extraordinarily demanding. And now she doesn't demand of anybody that she doesn't do herself. I've watched her. She is amazing in how much time she puts in and effort. However, principals and teachers have lives. And you can only work a person so many hours before they eventually burn out. And I think the pushing and the demands that she's putting on the principals, who therefore are then putting it on the teachers, has gotten to the point where it's a bit excessive. And again, there are those who will say, well, that's good. We need to be demanding the most from our people. But again, I would say, I think the average person out there doesn't know, for instance, a high school principal on a Friday in the fall probably arrives at work at 6 a.m. if not earlier, and probably goes home at midnight. You know, and that's just one of the 7 days in a week. They're on call 24/7. So they have demands without even having additional demands, just having the job. And so I think at some point there needs to be some kind of balance so that these men and women can have a life outside of their job and still be successful.
How would you impact that as a school board member, though? Do you tell the superintendent to back off, or?
That's about what you have to, maybe not use quite those words, but yeah. School board members meet with the superintendent privately besides the public sessions. They each meet with superintendent for at least, currently it's about an hour a week, each of them individually. And that's when you have to have some of those frank conversations.
What's your perception of how the school board handled the extension of her contract?
Excuse me. on the one hand, I understand the people who were appalled and did not want the extension, and I probably would not have voted for it. By the same token, I understand why they did it. I think they were looking at, and I really shouldn't say that because I'm trying to read minds of people I haven't talked to and don't know, but I have a feeling of, because of the possible changes in the school board makeup, because there will be at least 2 new people on the board. My guess is they probably were thinking, because of the people who voted yes, I think they were looking ahead. But again, I don't want to pretend I read anybody's mind or I didn't talk to anybody. I'm just speculating. I think it was a little early to vote for it, but again, I understand why they felt like, let's get it done. But I've also been told it's coming up again.
Dr. Ryan, can you tell us as well as the voters why you're the best candidate for District 3?
Well, we have 4 people running. I certainly have the best background in terms of my knowledge of the district, having come here when there were 38,000 people in Collier County and 2 high schools, Naples High and Immokalee High. I've watched the county grow. I've been in the classroom. I've been a counselor. I've been an administrator. I know Florida School of Law. I know Florida School of Finance. I have a very short learning curve to be a productive member of the board. I'm not coming with an agenda. I'm here for the kids and the teachers and the staff so that they will provide the best kind of education for the children of Collier County. So that's why I think I'm the best.
Okay. And will this be a full-time job for you, or do you have?
I'm retired, and as I said at one other place where the same question was asked, I said, if anything, my volunteer activities will have to take a back seat.
Are you being given financial support by any organization?
No. In fact, if you look at my, I'm having trouble raising funds, mostly because most of my supporters are like $5 and $10 contribution kind of thing. So as of now, I have not received any money from any organization.
In all the years that you've been here, can you point to some board members that you think have done a particularly good job?
Well, rather than talk about individuals, because I don't want to offend any of my friends, but I believe that the boards who were in the late 80s, early 90s, who thought ahead and structured the finances so that we took care of, and we were always ahead in building buildings, and we were ahead of the growth in this county. And then we had the money to refurbish the buildings. Those boards who put that in place, I think, did a really good service to the people of Collier County, because we have probably I've said this many times, we have the finest facilities, I think, in the world. I don't think there's any school district in the world where every single student is in a top-flight facility. Nobody is neglected in Collier County. Our neighbor to the north, Lee County, has over the years been constantly behind in its building. And we were always, we had never been seriously been behind in our buildings to provide the buildings needed. And that, I don't think the public appreciates the fact that in terms of the best use of their tax dollars, that that's really been a godsend here in Collier County.
Well, if these boards were visionary, what would you want the board that you're going to serve on, should you be elected, to envision for its future?
Goodness, hadn't thought about that one. The future, and again, depending upon your beliefs, there are the possibility 10 to 20 years from now, there's going to be some dramatic physical changes to Collier County, both physical and economic. And this board ought to start taking a look at that. What are those changes going to mean in terms of the students we produce for the workforce, and also in terms of buildings and facilities, et cetera, et cetera. There are predictions of what is going to happen, again, physically to the land area in this area, and also what that will mean economically. I think we're going to be seeing some dramatic changes. Again, not tomorrow, but 10 to 20 years from now, and maybe this board can start laying the groundwork for those potential changes.
Possibly along those lines, you mentioned the need to educate students who aren't necessarily going to need physics or algebra. Does Collier County do an adequate job with its technical training, its vocational training?
That's one of those things where you can always do more. We probably do, for this time in this area, as good a job, but it's certainly an area that needs to be constantly looked at and upgraded. Part of our problem is, and this is where I see the school board needs to make use of its bully pulpit more, is the state legislature is our biggest problem in terms of providing the funding and then the rules for the funding. And I think you're going to see also in terms of university funding, some strange things are going to begin to happen because of the way they've structured additional funding. In other words, this idea that you get funded for vocational training based upon how many people complete, and you don't get the money until after the student has completed the course. That puts a real damper in getting new programs started because there's no funding for starting the program. Those are serious problems in terms of funding, or trying to expand, particularly in the areas of vocational training. It's a big funding problem that might make sense to you if you're sitting in Tallahassee, but when you actually have to start up a program and you have to find the money to start up a program, it's not, it becomes like, wait a minute, this isn't making any sense. So.
You mentioned at the beginning your experience in Immokalee, the school grades that have come out recently and in the past have had some concentration of low achieving schools. In Immokalee, if you follow the grades per se, how would you as a board member address that?
Well, I've never liked the grading system, obviously. Again, that's one of those things created by politicians that I'm not sure is appropriate. When I was at Immokalee High, and we suffered some of those problems, it was the era before we actually got ABCD. We had different names, and I can't remember what they called us, but deficient or something, anyway. But they would send people in, and I remember the one year it was my job to stay on top of those things for the high school, and also to chaperone when we had visitors, take them around. And the comment I would always get was, my God, you're doing tremendous work here with what you've got. I don't think letter grades don't tell you what's going on. Now, does that mean we don't need to examine and look at what's going on in those schools? But by definition, some 300 schools are going to be F schools because the state has said there will be 300 F schools. So somebody's going to be there. It's kind of like, a friend of mine once said, you know, she was always scoring in the like 95th percentile in tests. It never occurred to her there was somebody who was being in the 1 percentile, and somebody has to be in the 1 percentile for you to be in the 95th. Somebody's going to be there. But again, that doesn't mean we don't need to take a look at it and make sure that the best teachers are out there, and the best situations are being created. People just don't take, and it's amazing what poverty does to students, and you cannot make the same demands on students. And again, that doesn't mean coddling. If you ask any of the students I taught, the last thing they would say about me is that I didn't push them or that I coddled them. You need to push them, you need to provide them with the best possible education, but you also have to be cognizant of the fact of what poverty does to a person. If nothing else, 28 years out there taught me was poverty is a very devastating.
Sorry.
What happens to the tape?
Keep going.
Keep going. Anyway, what I was saying was that poverty is a big factor in what's going on with these kids. Besides the second language difficulties, they're testing. I would say, would any of you want to take a high-level academic test after being dumped into a new country, after only 1 year of being mingled with people, and have to take a high-stakes academic test? I don't think I want to. And that's what we do. We say, the student's been here a year and a day, they have to take the test, whether they're prepared or not. That's ridiculous. And you know, between poverty and second language barriers, the teachers and staff out there are dealing with an awful lot, but that doesn't mean they're not doing a good job. But again, that doesn't mean we don't need to make sure that they're not getting the best out there.
A key indicator of student performance seems to be parent involvement. As a school board member, could you increase parent involvement? Do you have ideas to perhaps increase parent involvement, maybe specifically in Immokalee, where these problems persist?
That's probably the age-old question out there. Every year that I worked out there, that was, how do we get more parents? The difficulty is you're talking about a community where the adult population works very hard. They get up before dawn, they go to work, and they come home late in the evening, and then they have to feed the kids and take care of the house and wash the clothes and do all of those things. And so finding time to go to school activities is extraordinarily difficult. We tried as many ideas. Certainly offering food is always one of the one of the mainstays. If you can find food, it tends to attract people to come out. And that has nothing to do with Immokalee. That works in Naples too. Offer food and people show up. It's a very difficult thing just because of the fact that those people work as hard as they do. And so finding that magic thing is extraordinarily difficult. It's been a problem, you know, as long as I've been out there. I don't have a magic solution for that. I wish we could. I wish there was some. If somebody can find that magic bullet, we'll.
Well, we're about out of time. Does anybody have a final question?
I did want to ask, how are you campaigning, and as you campaign, what do you hear most from people?
Well, probably the two biggest questions are the things that we've covered, which are Common Core and charter schools. Seem to be on the minds of Naples people, particularly the people who, and that's the people who don't have kids in school.
Any final thoughts you'd like to offer to the voters?
By the same token, I did talk to a parent yesterday who is thrilled, and I just in casual conversation, and she feels she's had a son. She has a son in college. She has a son in middle school, and she's said, you know, just had glowing things to say about the Collier County Public Schools and how satisfied she is with the job they're doing.